Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The man who does not need anyone is an outlaw of society." Now, in this video, I want to share with you why Nietzsche said that the man who doesn't need anyone is society's greatest threat. And I want to show you how this idea connects to two other ideas from Nietzsche, which are equally as powerful as well. Now, this is a bit of a controversial idea, so I'd like to hear your thoughts on it down below in the comments section. But before we get into it, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing. It really helps me out. And with that said, let's begin. So, we have to start with a quote from Nietzsche himself, which says, "He who has a why can endure any how." Let's break that down. How many of you have ever had a goal or a dream that you wanted to achieve, but you didn't know exactly how you were going to get there? Perhaps you wanted to get in shape, but you weren't sure what kind of workout routine to follow or what diet you should eat. Or maybe you wanted to start a business, but you weren't certain what industry you should get into, or even what type of product or service you should offer. Whatever the case may be, most of us spend our lives pursuing things without knowing exactly how we're going to get there. We just have a strong desire to achieve a certain outcome, but we're not sure what steps to take to actually make it happen. In these cases, we don't really have a why, at least not a strong enough one anyway. We just sort of go through life from day to day, trying to figure things out and hoping that eventually we'll get to where we want to be. But here's the thing. If you don't have a why, then you won't have the motivation to push forward when times get tough. You see, everyone has obstacles to overcome and challenges to face when pursuing their goals. But those who have a strong why are able to push through these obstacles and reach their goals, while those who do not often give up. This is why Nietzsche said that he who has a why can endure any how. You see, having a strong why gives us the strength we need to endure the difficulties and setbacks that inevitably come with pursuing any goal. And so now that we understand this first concept, let's move on to the second one. So, you may have heard of Stoicism before. In fact, if you watch my videos on Marcus Aurelius and Seneca, you probably know that they were Stoics. But what many people do not realize is that the Stoics believed that life was full of obstacles, and that we had to be prepared to face them with courage and dignity. They also believed that we could control our emotions and reactions to events by focusing on what we could change and accepting what we could not. But perhaps the most important lesson from Stoicism is that we should strive to be useful to others. Marcus Aurelius famously wrote in his journal, "A person's worth is no greater than the amount of good they do." He believed that our purpose in life was to serve others and make a positive impact on the world. By doing so, we would find happiness and fulfillment. But here's the interesting thing about Stoicism. Although it was a philosophy that emphasized virtue, reason, and self-control, it was not without its flaws. In fact, some have argued that Stoicism can be too rigid and inflexible, that it can lead to a lack of empathy and compassion for others, and that it can even be used to justify inaction and apathy in the face of injustice. One of the most common criticisms of Stoicism is that it encourages people to simply accept whatever life throws at them, no matter how bad it is. And while there is certainly something to be said for being resilient and adaptable in the face of adversity, there is also a limit to how much suffering we should be willing to endure. Sometimes it is not only acceptable but necessary to fight back against injustice, to speak out against oppression, and to take action to improve our situation and the situation of others. So now that we understand these two concepts, let's put them together and see how they apply to the idea that the man who doesn't need anyone is society's greatest threat. When we think about it, we can see that someone who doesn't need anyone else is someone who likely doesn't have a strong why. Why do you need anything if you don't need anyone else? And we can also see that this type of person is probably not very stoic either, because if you don't care about others, and you do not try to be a good and virtuous person, then you're not following the Stoic path. So someone who doesn't need anyone else is someone who is missing two of the most important qualities that make us human beings: a strong sense of purpose and a concern for the well-being of others. Now you might be thinking, okay, great. So what's wrong with that? Well, everything. Let me explain. We live in a society that values individualism and self-reliance above all else. And while there is certainly something to be said for being independent and taking care of yourself, when taken to an extreme, this can lead to a lack of empathy and concern for others. And when you combine that with a lack of purpose or direction in life, you get someone who is not only unfulfilled and unhappy, but also a threat to society as a whole. Think about it. Someone who doesn't need anyone else is someone who is not invested in the well-being of others. They are not willing to work for the common good or make sacrifices for the greater good. They only look out for themselves. And in a society that is built on cooperation, compassion, and a sense of community, this type of person is an outsider, someone who does not contribute to the common good and is therefore a threat to the social order. Of course, not all people who are self-reliant or independent are threats to society. There are many people who are perfectly capable of taking care of themselves and still manage to be good, productive members of society. The key difference between these people and those who are truly self-reliant is that the former still maintain a sense of empathy and concern for others. They may be self-reliant when it comes to meeting their own needs, but they are still willing to help others and contribute to the common good. However, those who are truly self-reliant are not only unwilling to help others, but they often resent those who need help. They see anyone who is dependent on others as weak and pathetic, and they believe that everyone should be solely responsible for themselves. Now, you might be thinking that this is a pretty extreme view to take, but it's actually quite common. In fact, there are entire communities of people who identify as voluntary humanists, and they believe that we should reject all forms of altruism and charity because they are based on weakness and dependency. Voluntary humanists argue that we should only help others if we stand to benefit from doing so. But if we are truly rational beings, then we should be able to see that this is not only a selfish way to view the world, but it's also unsustainable. If no one is willing to help anyone else, then society will quickly collapse into chaos and anarchy. Of course, we do have to be careful not to take the opposite extreme and become overly dependent on others. But there does need to be a balance between self-reliance and interdependence. And I believe that it is our responsibility as individuals to find that balance within ourselves. When we do, we become more than just self-reliant or independent individuals. We become contributing members of society who are capable of great things. Now, with that said, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this topic. Do you agree with Nietzsche that the man who doesn't need anyone is society's greatest threat? Or do you think that this is just another example of how he was wrong? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. And with that said, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please make sure to subscribe. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video.